All right, all you cool cats and kittens, this is your Commissioner Tim with the Week 2 recap of our inaugural season of the Dynasty League of Cool Cat and Kittens League. So before we get started off with the weekly recap, obviously we're doing a cool new format. I put a lot of time into this. There's one person in our league that I'll have to make sure that all of us give a tremendous shout out to, which is Eves. Thank you so much for making our official logo. I mean, it looks tremendous. I think there's a lot of deep meaning if you dive into the details of the design work that you've done. The 8 stars represents the 8 founding members who are in our league this season. Obviously, the cat reaching for the stars. Couldn't be better. This is great. I'm going to make sure that there's a t-shirt and hat and everything made so that every year when we do our rookie drafts going forward, all you guys are going to be equipped with the new season merchandise going forward. All right, so that takes us into week 2. Obviously, I want to say that the video format for this is quite different than the first week's recap, and that's because I knew coming into Monday Night Football when I was writing the script for all the matchups for the recap that I would be losing to Yves, even though I had a 6-point advantage in the projections heading into this game, because there's no amount of lead that was going to be safe going into Monday Night Football on a redemption game for the Green Bay Packers. So that leads us to matchup 1 between Trust the Process and Cup to Canada. Yves ended up taking this with a 18-point differential. Obviously, like I mentioned, there was a 6-point lead spread heading into it. Man, that swing of 24 points in a single game, but I mean, that would happen when Aaron Jones gets another 4-touchdown game in his career for 38.5 points, and Devontae Adams obviously showing that he is receiver number 1, getting you 16.1 points for the week. Crap leg Jameis, looking a lot like his Tampa Bay form. Had 2 interceptions, 1 touchdown, or 0 touchdowns on just 111 yards throwing. And he ended up, I don't know if you can call it this, but he ended up salvaging what could have been even a worse day by having that 1 single rush touchdown for the night. Another play that I want to mention on his roster is going to be Nuke. So Hopkins, obviously the game script from the Vikings was evident that it was just really trying to solely contain DeAndre Hopkins, especially in that second half. So I believe that there was just 1 small gain in entirety of the second half. He got most of the points in the first half. And obviously on to Travis Kelce. Travis Kelce showed up. Man, that was one of the best touchdown receptions, creations, whatever you want to call it. That 46 yards touchdown by Travis Kelce that he ended up essentially creating all himself. And that was a dagger. And Deontay, as well as Najee Harris with some amazing fourth quarter production down the road. That 25-yard fourth quarter reception touchdown, man, that showed everyone why Najee Harris was so hyped up coming into this season as a rookie. It was unfortunate to see Deontay going down actually in the last play. That was pretty meaningless and from a game standpoint, but looks like it's nothing serious, though it's likely that he's going to be missing at least a couple of weeks. So obviously that means a lot of action probably for Juju, as well as maybe even Najee Harris starts to get a little bit more touches out of the backfield in terms of sort of receptions as well going forward. Some bench notables for Cup to Canada. Again, the theme of Yves' team this week was injuries. Tua was carted off. It looked pretty gruesome, and it's obviously never a good sign when a player is carted off, but all reports are saying that it's a day-to-day. I think it was like a bruised rib, but we'll see if he ends up coming back. And speaking of another player, Michael Carter on the bench looks like he's on a potential trajectory to end up taking dominant shares of the Jets' backfield for whatever that may mean. He had 5 out of 19 backfield touches in week 1, but in week 2, he ended up sharing the lead in terms of total touches out of that backfield at 12 carries alongside Ty Johnson. And Tevin Coleman went down from the lead at 9 all the way down to 5 in week 2. So it seems like it's going to go to one of these young guys if one is to emerge as the RB1 in that backfield. And for Yves, he's got both of them. So Good luck to you for whatever it may mean to have the RB1 of the Jets backfield, but looks like you got something better than you expected at the ADP of both of the players that you drafted. And last player that I'll mention on Yeve's roster is the health and status of Josh Jacobs. As of today, which is Tuesday at 4 p.m., still not hearing anything regarding when Josh Jacobs will be coming back. He looked visibly in discomfort on that Monday Night Football game last week, and obviously made sense that he would miss the quicker, shorter turnaround time on the Sunday night game when he missed all of practice last week. So the question mark here is, when will Josh Jacobs be back? Because he's obviously, no matter what you feel about him, you know that he can always, at the very least, plug and play into the flex positions for you. So all that said, our preseason commissioners, the plural, pick as the contender favorite is now sitting at 1-1. Now finally gets that W on the board, hard-earned win. But if Green Bay offense and Pittsburgh offense continues to roll, Eve should be okay. But with injuries piling up and the massive gaping hole at the quarterback 2 spot, I am expecting a lot of managers to hear from Yves as the season rolls on in terms of trades. So over to trust a process. Obviously, the notable storylines for this team is that I've traded away one of what a lot of managers believe to be the 2 untouchable assets on my roster in a blockbuster trade with Choeda as well as John Gallagher. Now with Lamar gone, Teddy Bridgewater filled in admirably against the porous Jacksonville secondary, and seemed like it was a good stream play, especially given that they gave up 24 points to Tyrod Taylor in week 1. The trade, speaking of that, actually got my roster quite thinned down, and I paid obviously a very high price to acquire Jonathan Taylor, which was the blockbuster acquisition for me. But he obviously didn't perform in week 2, nor did he even get the volume that was expected for him. So let's see how this plays out. In terms of Gronk, right there. Gronk with another 2 touchdown week. Gronk hasn't gone over, by the way, 12 touchdowns in a single season since 2014. And his career high was in 2011 with 17 touchdowns, which was his second year in the league. So he's got 4 touchdowns through 2 weeks. I mean, he could be in line for a career season, no different than Tom Brady, probably in line for a potential touchdown career record as well for himself. So on the bench notables, the hot name of the waiver pickups for this week, Rondale Moore. A 21-point outing after a stellar first week as well. This rookie looks good. I mean, he was able to score 21 points against the Vikings defense, who obviously game planned to take touches away from DeAndre Hopkins, but a respectable 13 targets through 2 weeks. So Cliff Kingsbury's offense seems to be creating specifically plays that are designed for Rondale Moore and his unique skill set. So it's going to be really interesting to see how he gets involved. Now, Michael Pittman Jr. is someone that I was excited about drafting as a late sort of pick this year's draft. Finally got his expected breakout performance, 16.3 points in the week without any touchdowns. But the question here is Carson Wentz going to be injured? Is he hurt? Is he going to be able to play this upcoming week? I mean, Pittman showed what he's capable of on a healthy offense under Carson Wentz. But it's going to be his performance throughout the rest of the season is going to be directly tied to Carson Wentz's health and status for the rest of the season. So the summary for my team is super thin bench. Basically needing to hold on to 4 quarterbacks because I have 2 rookie quarterbacks who are not ready for game time, and 4 players that are either on injured reserve or they're out completely. So there will likely be moves that I need to make sure I start to consolidate talent to get a little bit more competitive again week over week. So over to matchup 2, which is Bills Mafia against bcampo. Ben took this win, and unfortunately for Brandon, had he gotten his own matchup right, he would have finished 4-0, perfect 4-0 in terms of predictions for week 2. Unfortunately, Ben took the win. So here's the opposite side of the story that Cup to Canada is having, which is for the first 2 weeks of the season, someone that we rated highly preseason, underperforming, and here's Ben, who's considered to be the bottom tier of the league heading into the season due to the uncertainty at quarterback, as well as the question marks around the youth of the players who he drafted with a heavy draft stock, who needed to just prove out. But hey, here we are. Ben is week 2-0 after week 2. And when there's only 14 regular games to be played before the fantasy football playoffs, that 2-0 lead makes a huge difference in terms of your probability to get a playoff berth. So, on to Ben's roster. Speaking of the quarterbacks, Jalen Hurts looks good, right? He looks like the real deal. And I think if we held the draft today, I would say that, so Jalen was selected 13th quarterback overall, but if we held the draft today, I would say that he goes at least 5 spots higher before some of the names like Aaron Rodgers, Trey Lance, Justin Fields, Joe Burrow, as well as Russell Wilson, given his youth and just how he looks dangerous on the ground. Looks like he's got his passing game figured out. So it looks like he's got this going, and obviously Trevor Lawrence is having a hard time sort of acclimating, but he's got obviously Kirk Cousins over there at QB2 spot, who's been filling in extremely well and probably going to be able to hold that position until maybe Trevor Lawrence is back into the fold later this season. The major story by a mile, though, for Ben's roster for me was Cooper Kupp. I mean, I think this dude looks like he's taking his 2019 form, and I believe he was the 10th highest scoring output receiver for that season. And he's trying to show everyone that that's not even his peak form, especially with Matt Stafford under center for the Rams offense. I mean, this guy scored 32.3 points in week 2. And currently, Cooper Kupp is receiver number 1 in all of NFL, whether you believe it or not. I mean, he had a stellar first week as well. He is making the world forget about Robert Woods right now. So between Cooper Kupp, Allen Robinson, Chase Claypool, and Justin Jefferson, I mean, that's an extremely must-start every week type of receiver core that Ben is showing up. And not to even mention the sneaky great free agency pickup, not even waivers, the free agency pickup he made last week in Sterling Shepard. Whether you believe it or not, Sterling Shepard after week 2 is the number 9 receiver in all of NFL today. So the other thing that I want to mention is just to continue giving kudos to Ben and how he started out for the first 2 weeks of the season, is the numbers that I look at the database for my own sort of fantasy purposes. This actually has Ben in our league with the highest playoff odds, sitting at 75%. So take it for what it is. Ben's roster is certainly stronger than anyone could have predicted coming into the season. So on the other side of that matchup, whereas Ben's key players outperform, we have Commissioner Brandon's whose key players failed to show up again in week 2. So I'll start out with Josh Allen, who was supposed to be, again, an MVP caliber type of player. And after 2 weeks, I see no way that Josh Allen's going to be able to contend for an MVP this year. I mean, he completed 17 out of 33 throws, horrid fantasy production, and it's certainly not what you can expect to win from your second overall draft pick out of the entire starter draft for a dynasty league. And at QB2, Dak, he had a decent play and took the Cowboys to a win, but horrid fantasy production with just 7.48 points for the week. Obviously, Cowboys scripted a very run-heavy offense scheme against the Chargers, and that affected Dak and his fantasy production accordingly. And Clyde Edwards-Helaire, I mean, just 46 yards on 13 carries. Maybe the script was wrong. Obviously, had another fumble, but 2.6 points. 2 back-to-back disappointing weeks for Clyde Edwards-Helaire. And A.J. Brown with just 5.8 points for the week on just 3 receptions out of 9 targets. So those 4 players are Brandon's 4 out of 5 first picks in the draft this year. And when 4 out of your first 5 draft picks gives you a combined 32.5 points for the week, you know you're going to be having an extremely challenging week, and that was the case here for Commissioner Brandon. So here he is sitting at 1-1. Team's not looking that great. Overall output for the season hasn't been that strong over 2 weeks. Obviously, season's early, but I sense some moves coming certainly to bolster up his roster as we get closer to sort of mid-season as well. So I'll start out with the bench notables because I mentioned Bills Mafia starters already. I felt like his key starters obviously struggled massively, but the bench performed pretty well. So Bills Mafia has immense depth in the league, and I actually have the Bills Mafia bench at probably number 1 in the entire league. So Derek Carr, looking like a top 10 quarterback in the league to start the season, even to the point that it wouldn't be ridiculous to consider starting Derek Carr over Dak Prescott on certain matchups, like the ones that we saw in week 2. And a couple players had some huge weeks, but likely some just sparks in the pan, unless proven otherwise, in players like James White, as well as Devin Singletary. But there's also week 2 outputs that were stellar from players like Courtland Sutton, Marquise Hollywood Brown, and Noah Fant. And I think those performances that we saw in week 2 with those players will be more indicative of how these players are going to be playing for the rest of the season as well. And the last player that I'll mention on Bills Mafia's bench is the same player that I mentioned as a notable player / disappointment of week 1's video, and that was James Robinson. So he was out-touched by Carlos Hyde in week 1 a lot, which is just unexpected. But in week 2, Carlos Hyde really took a huge backseat to James Robinson. Robinson ended up with 14 touches to Hyde's 2. So I think Robinson should be a solid, reliable flex play into the rest of the season. So that should be stronger of a bolster for Brandon. Overall, all of these big name players, I have Bills Mafia, like I said, bench as number 1 strength in the league today. Obviously, bench players aren't going to give you the fantasy production. So as Bills Mafia starts a season at 1-1, with some key players who are underperforming, like in Clyde Edwards-Helaire, I do expect large moves to be made by the commissioner in using some of his strong bench pieces to try to upgrade some of his starters down the road. And now over to the phallic matchup 3 between full Chubb and Choeda. So this was an extremely close matchup, and for me, this gets the post-week matchup of the week award from me. And yes, it was a low-scoring output and a bad output on both teams, but how the matchup ended, getting it was the deciding factor for me in giving the award for the matchup of the week here. And the commissioner Brandon, with this win, also was able to make sure that he locks in a winning record for predictions for this week. So that Lamar sort of, front flip, rush, touchdown, not only gave the Ravens the victory, but also Choeda the victory in the very last seconds of that game and this week, as well as Brandon the win as well. So, man, this, like Brandon predicted heading into this week, this puts full Chubb in an extremely tough situation, sitting at 0-2 to start the season. Remember, John was the commissioner's, plural, pick as the dark horse for contention this year behind his extremely strong running backs, and also the expected output of his quarterbacks in Baker Mayfield and Justin Herbert. So onto his roster and talking about the quarterback play and talking about Justin Herbert, man, he's starting out extremely slow in terms of fantasy output. So I did some digging and putting that into sort of the slow start into context. If you take Justin Herbert's first 2 weeks of his current season, his sophomore season, and compare it against the 15 games that he played in his rookie season, he only had 2 games that were worse than the first 2 games of this season for his sophomore year. So, bad start, but I'm sure Herbert's going to be snapping out of it and maybe sophomore slumps. But through mid-season, I'm sure he's going to be a great prospect. The kid's got a lot of talent. He's got a strong arm as well. And obviously, full Chubb, we got to talk about Nick Chubb. Nick Chubb, chubbing things for full Chubb in week 2 again, 95 yards and a touchdown, just 11 carries, and even had a reception for 16.3 points total. Chubb is currently the number 3 ranked running back after 2 weeks in all of NFL. And staying on the running back topic, it was good to see Zeke bouncing back against a softer Browns D-line after that tough sort of the front 7 against Tampa Bay in week 1. So he ended up netting 16.7 points. Not too shabby, but I think the question for me, or at least the very least for the first half of this season, is how much workload will Zeke see versus Tony Pollard? I think Pollard had the better fantasy output in week 2 with 13 carries and 3 receptions and a touchdown for 21.5 points. But he looked better on the field. He looked fresher, he's quicker, he's faster. So Mike McCarthy heading into preseason, he did say that they would like to keep Zeke fresh throughout the season, but I never expected it to be this near 50-50 type of distribution between the 2 players. So I think that's going to be interesting to see as the season progresses. And John, obviously he lost, and he also left a lot of points on the bench. Devontae Smith, the rookie, and the theme of sort of the struggling for John is trusting in the rookies too much. I think Devontae Smith, the rookie, after a stellar first week, looked like a rookie in week 2 and just getting 2 catches out of 7 targets for a total of 2.6 points. Corey Davis obviously had a horrible week, but he was the victim of Zach Wilson, the rookie quarterback, just looking like he's completely lost in the NFL game. So I think it's always hard to trust a rookie so early in this season, but overall on full Chubb's bench, Juju looked good. I mean, as good as Juju could, I guess. But if Deontay Johnson, like I mentioned earlier in matchup 1 with Cup to Canada, if Deontay Johnson is to miss any time, and it looks like as of today, he is expected to miss some time, I think Juju's going to be a must start for John going forward, at least at the flex spots. And that young buck, Henry Huggs, got his second 100-yard plus 100-yard plus game of his career and scored 20 points for John on the bench, though, in week 2. But that Raiders offense looks like they've gelled, quite a bit, and Ruggs could be a breakout potential for this year, especially benefiting from the growth of Derek Carr and all the attention that Darren Waller are getting. And another player in KJ Osborne. I think KJ Osborne is another sophomore with a relatively quiet rookie season who looks like another potential breakout. And is obviously benefiting from all the attention that the secondaries are giving to Adam Thielen and Justin Jefferson. But KJ Osborne looks good. So I think these 2 players and a couple of other players on John's benches are going to be worth checking out for the rest of the season. So last note that I'll talk about for John before moving over to Choeda is, man, what is going on with the Niners backfield? Can anyone figure this out? Obviously, Raheem Mostert is out for this season with this knee surgery that he just had, but now Hasty is out for at least a few weeks with a high ankle sprain, it looks like, which now leaves Mitchell and Sermon as the 2 running backs, which is great for John because he's got both. But Mitchell's injured on a day-to-day with, I believe, a shoulder injury, and Sermon is going through a concussion protocol, and he still looked like he wasn't getting any love from the coaches or trust from the coaches in week 2. So, we'll see what happens. But the other crazy thing about all these injuries that are piling up is Hasty, Mitchell, and Sermon, the players that I mentioned that was injured in week 2, they all got injured within a 5-minute span in fourth quarter in that game together. So we'll see what happens. But if one of them is to be an RB1, it's obviously likely going to be a Mitchell or a Sermon. And thankfully, John's got both of those players for whatever that back field by committee ends up looking like once it sort of progresses into the midseason. So over to Choeda. Both of these teams made blockbuster trades heading into Sunday, full Chubb as well as Choeda. And one of those acquisition pieces for Choeda, Lamar Jackson, ended up delivering the win for him, like I mentioned earlier, late on Sunday night. I think notable players for Choeda for me, beyond Lamar though, was Julio Jones, because after week 1, he looked like age finally caught up to him. I think he's like 33 or something like that. But in week 2, he obviously showed Julio Jones is Julio Jones with or without Matt Ryan. 6 of 8 with 128 yards, 15.8 point outing, even without a touchdown. You got to take that from your flex play all day. I think the concerning player for me is Saquon. But if you drafted Saquon this year, you knew you were getting a discount on his ADP because you also knew that he'll be starting off slow as he comes back from injury. So when you factor all that in, it's a little bit more manageable from a mental standpoint, but he's still only seeing 3.2 points in week 1 and then 7.9 points in week 2 from your first round draft pick, from your stud running back. It's got to give you some heartburn, but at least the promising signs for Choeda that you would need to be sane and remain sane, I think, are there, though, because Saquon, it sounded like he was in about 48% of snaps in week 1, and he was up at, I believe, 84% of snaps in week 2. So Saquon's getting more volumes, and Saquon obviously will be Saquon, and it's just a matter of when. So I mentioned the trade earlier, but after trading away CeeDee, for Choeda, he also had another injury to Jarvis Landry early in week 2. So his what original deep and top heavy receiver core has gotten thin very quickly. So until Michael Thomas comes back in week 7, assuming he comes back when he's earliest able to, I'll be keeping a close eye out on what Choeda does for those remaining sort of flex positions at large. All right, so on to the last matchup, Ryan versus the Washington Fantasy Football Team. Oops, I didn't write the score here, but the Washington Fantasy Football Team ended up having the week's highest scoring output, I believe at about 175. Let me double check that. Yeah, 175. He was the weekly scoring output leader. So this was a pretty solid matchup too. I mean, the scoring output had a fairly large difference in the end, but I mean, that will happen when you have Derrick Henry getting you 44.7 points. But both teams are really, really strong. And even though Ryan lost, I feel like Ryan has moved into this true contender tier for me for this season. And on that note, there'll be a separate video tomorrow on power rankings as well. But back on this matchup as a whole, obviously the MVP for me for this matchup, but also for the entire week, is Derrick Henry. I mean, after that week 1, I thought Derrick Henry was showing signs of having been an overworked bell cow in that Titans offense. But he put all those, concerns and worries aside and put all the skeptics and gave him the bird. And basically with this ridiculous 35 carry night, 182 yards, 3 touchdowns. One thing I want to mention about Derrick Henry, though, what is crazier besides just his on-the-ground performance, which we know that Derrick Henry can, be good for on any given week, is that he actually got 6 receptions for 55 yards. So I had to dig in for this, but that is his career high in receptions. So can you imagine what Derrick Henry can be as a fantasy asset if he, let's say, logs another 2,000-yard rushing season, which is obviously ridiculous, but we all know that he can with this offense. But pair that, last year's rushing performance, with maybe 70 catches. He would be in the Christian McCaffrey stratosphere in the fantasy realm, and maybe even better. So that's insane. I'm going to be keeping a close eye out on his receiving volume for the next few weeks to see if this is truth or cap. But I mean, Derrick Henry, man, if week 2 is anything to go by, this guy might have another ridiculous fantasy season that's just going to be breaking the bank in the hearts of everyone. So staying on the Washington Fantasy Football Team's notables, I think Kyle Pitts showed a pretty good week and was a visible improvement since week 1. He was probably the most hyped rookie coming to the draft this year, as well as fantasy. So it'll be interesting to see how quickly he continues to sort of progress up through his recognition of coverage, does route running, and his catching as well. Other player, Tyler Lockett, for me, with another massive week. I think he had another one that could have been for his second touchdown, if I remember right. But Lockett just seemed to be able to find his way behind the secondary in both week 1 and week 2. So perhaps this is the year in which his boom bust label is taken off, and maybe so much of the early season defensive prep, right, heading into this year has been overly focused on DK Metcalf, and people may have forgotten about Tyler Lockett. I don't know, but that's really allowed Tyler Lockett to be a complete different player to start out the season, at least. So I think it's going to be interesting to see over the next few weeks what Lockett really looks like from a consistency basis. So I got 2 more players for Adam. We got Antonio Brown. I mean, Antonio Brown played the role of Mike Evans in the Tampa Bay receiver corps last week, and I think there's always going to be that one player on the Tampa Bay Bucks receiving corps, including Gronk, that is always going to be that odd man out at the party. And in week 2, that just seemed to be Antonio Brown. He had just, 1 reception for 17 yards on just 3 targets as well, after going off and looking like vintage AB on the Pittsburgh in the mid-2010s. Certainly, we'll have to see what's real going forward. Is it going to be a week 1 Antonio Brown, or is it going to be a week 2 Antonio Brown for the rest of the season? The last player that I'll mention, because I also don't want to necessarily mention Alvin Kamara's bad week, I don't think that needs to be actually talked about, is especially with how bad Jameis was, is actually Mike Williams. I think Mike Williams has looked sharp through the 2 weeks in the season. I actually got the chance to catch both of those games in full. I think obviously that he's got the biggest body. He's always had the biggest body on the field in most weeks. I'm just not seeing his usual drops, and he just looks strong and agile. And he's already, right now, he's up at, 2 touchdowns? That's half of his last year's entire touchdown total. So an 18th round draft pickup by the Washington Fantasy Football Team, I think looks like an absolute draft day steal. So that looks good. And then in terms of Ryan, I think nothing really worth noting. I think, like I mentioned earlier, Ryan has now moved up into this tier of the favorites for me. I think it's right between him and Eves. Again, I'll do a separate video tomorrow on the updated power rankings. But when Tom Brady looks like he's going to have a fantasy career year at age 44 in, I believe, year 22 of his NFL career, I mean, you're going to be good, right? Like, Tom Brady was drafted by Ryan with the 11th pick, which I think is pretty high, but 11th pick, performing better than everyone but 2 other quarterbacks in this entire league, and I believe that's probably Mahomes and Kyler Murray. Obviously, Dalvin Cook is going to be there. The only thing that I'll mention about Ryan's roster are probably 2 players, which is it was disheartening to see Amari Cooper getting no production, and the notes are saying that's another injury-related issue. So we'll see what happens with Amari going forward. But I think one weakness that I see in Ryan's roster is he's got the quarterback play figured out, is question marks on Antonio Gibson. He was so hyped up coming into it. He was going to get so much volume. Week 1, we saw a little bit of that. In week 2, J.D. McKissic comes in and takes a lot of the snaps, and I believe J.D. McKissic ended up outscoring him in terms of production as well. Heading into this season, no one thought, people thought that he was going to get the Christian McCaffrey type of workload as a bell cow for this offense. Perhaps, he's still a sophomore and he's barely ever played running back his entire life. But hopefully we're going to be able to see some growth and acceleration to sort of get the bell cow workload for Ryan's team. And if so, I think Ryan's going to be a contender favorite for me. All right, so that does it in terms of the matchup reviews. Commissioner Brandon's weekly picks record in week 2 is 3-1, which puts him at 4-4 for the season. Very respectable, Brandon. Looking forward to the Thursday video for the weekly predictions again. And have a good, safe rest of the week. See you Thursday, Sunday, and Monday. Peace.